Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I'm your host, Josh Amick, with my panel, as always, Fritz, John, and Mark. I want to jump right into it. We got the final four teams, 2 games slated for this weekend. And we're going to start with the Bobcats. They're hosting another playoff game, taking on South Dakota, who just knocked off UC Davis. What is going to be the biggest challenge for the Bobcats in this matchup with South Dakota, Fritz?
Well, I think you've got two really good offensive lines. I was really impressed by South Dakota's. You know, they had a couple of guys get banged up here and there, and then they still kept pounding the rock pretty well with that Tice kid. He's just a huge running back who you really need to gang tackle, and he and Pierre have over 1,000 yards each. So that's the first part. Second part, I think on the other side of the ball, I think the Bobcats need a better game out of Ty McCullough than they got last week, even though it didn't matter against Idaho. I think the Bobcats have enough speed and depth, and the fact that they're at home will be a big factor. But mainly handling Tice and Pierre, that left-handed quarterback they have, was pretty on target, I thought. He had a tip drill interception, and I think he threw another pick inside the 5 as well, or unless that was a fumble. I just watched a game a minute ago. But I will point out that they haven't been outside since they went to South Dakota State, and they lost that game 20-17, which is no crime. I think it's going to probably be about 42, 45 degrees at kickoff in Bozeman Saturday. The coldest game they had was in Brookings. It was 53. I think it'd be cool for the Bobcats and their fans if it was 32 and snowing. It could happen. It's 5 days away or 6 days away. But yeah, big battle of teams that like to run and stop the run.
Based on how they played against UC Davis, this defense is humming for South Dakota, forcing 8 turnovers last week, and now going into a Montana State team that's been very efficient offensively, both running it and throwing it now in the playoffs, especially. We've talked a lot, Tommy Mellott's developed a lot more as a passer this year. I think Bobcat fans were holding their breath a little bit more against Idaho with him having to run the ball more, with Scott Trey Humphrey missing it. But, if they get Scott Trey Humphrey back, get Rohan Jones back in the lineup, they get the Cats to, closer to full health, it'll be a very good game. But yeah, just like Fritz mentioned, the running game for South Dakota is very good right now. And as long as they can get healthy, I think that's probably they just have to get all the parts humming at this time of the year. There's no slacking teams left.
Yeah, I think biggest challenge for the Bobcats stopping the run from South Dakota and trying to run the ball in South Dakota, because they're pretty good at both. I mean, you look at the Idaho game and it was 52-19, but it was 10-10 for early, and Idaho's moving the ball well on them. I didn't think it was time for that, the trickeration and stuff like that they thought they had to do. I thought they were going toe to toe with Montana State, and then they kind of got cute, and then it kind of got away from them. So teams can move the ball on Montana State, so we will see. I mean, South Dakota, they lost to South Dakota State in overtime and beat North Dakota State, so they're a good team. They don't have the pedigree of the Dakota State schools, but they're pretty good. Montana State, better be ready.
Yeah, Mark, you kind of touched on it, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that subject. South Dakota State has a top 10 rushing defense as well as a top 10 rushing offense. With their defense, do we think this is going to be another game where Mellott is going to have to use his legs a lot more? Or do you think with that O-line and that rushing attack, Montana State will, get the best of South Dakota's rushing defense? John, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like if Scott Trey Humphrey's back in the lineup healthy, I know he was taking warm-ups out there on Friday against Idaho, but if he's back in there, you can kind of rely on him and Adam Jones, who rushed for 4 touchdowns against Idaho. And maybe you can make him a lot more of a passer like he was against UT Martin. I mean, going for 300 yards, and he's never going to be a pocket passer. You're going to move him out of the pocket. You're going to threaten him with the run game, that he has those legs that he can use. But yeah, if they're healthy, I think that being able to not depend on him running it and use that as more of a strategic weapon will be much better for Montana State.
Mm.
Yeah, the more you run Mellott, the more, we talked about the dogs chasing cars thing. And so he's very dynamic. And like Fritz mentioned in the last the segment earlier this week about, he drops back to pass and gets flushed out of the pocket and runs for 63 yards. So that's something you can't really account for or just factor into a game. I would say, I mean, we'll find out. They haven't played, so we'll find out who owns the line of scrimmage between Montana State and South Dakota. I mean, that's the thing about Mellott is, he's a great runner, but one hit away from a backup, and they can't afford to lose him. They've shown they could win without their top running back or top two running backs, but they can't afford to lose Tommy. So, but they also know that they got to run him a little bit because he's such an effective weapon. So, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that Mellott's two biggest games running the ball were both against Idaho, and it's because Idaho was pinning their ears back and really plugging those gaps for Adam Jones and company. And I think I think Montana State eventually wore him down and was able to create some creases, but I don't imagine that they will run Tommy Mellott 15 designed runs. I think it's it'll be more of an action where he's going to be moving outside the pocket with run pass options and be able to tuck the ball and run and staying out of contact as much as he can, because you saw it last week. Lan Larson was cruising along. He was being effective. He tore off a 25-yard run, and then he had about a 9-yard gain, and those guys went for the ankles and got one twisted up, and off he went. Yeah, they can't afford to lose Mellott. I think Bobby Hauck's line was his best ability might be availability, and he makes a difference when he's in the game. So you got to keep him in there, and he will run, but they won't be a bunch of designed runs.
Fair enough. All right, we're gonna switch away from the Big Sky to talk about the other team that could possibly play Montana State if Montana State gets it done. Is South Dakota State. They lost earlier this year at Fargo. 13-9, but since then they have won 7 straight games, coming off a huge win, not even competition, against Incarnate Word. Is this a chance for a road team this weekend to pull off the upset, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically it would be an upset, them being the 3 seed and North Dakota State being the 2. I think it's a pick 'em. I mean, you got two teams that are basically the same team, mostly running, pass the ball a little bit. I mean, North Dakota State throws the ball a little bit more, but they both can do it. North Dakota State maybe has the edge there at home. I think they won that game. Was it 13-9? They scored in the last 2 minutes, or otherwise it could have been South Dakota State that won that game. So I think it's a pick 'em. It's obviously the marquee matchup of the two this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Mark pretty much stole my notes. 13-9. Cam Miller threw a TD pass with a minute 49 left. And then the Jacks got to midfield, and then their quarterback threw an interception from midfield with a minute left. So the game was undecided till a minute was left. I think that will serve South Dakota State more than it will North Dakota State, just to have a chip on their shoulder and be able to get those guys at home.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really fun one to watch. Like they've mentioned before, the 13-9 game earlier in the season, the Dakota Marker rivalry, being South Dakota State having that loss gets them a little chip on their shoulder. They'll want to go into Frisco or to Fargo and get the win again, where they lost earlier this year. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, North Dakota State's a team that's used to being in the national championship game. Their fans probably have timeshares in the Dallas area that they haven't gotten to use the past couple of years because of South Dakota State. So they're going to want to go out there, get back. As for the players on the field, it's really evenly matched up. Gronowski and Miller are both great quarterbacks. The rushing game for South Dakota State ran for 273 last week against Incarnate Word. I think I saw that they've outscored Incarnate Word like 103-21 in their 2 matchups this year. So not exactly a great matchup for the Cardinals. But North Dakota State held Mercer to just 7 points last week. Bryce Lance, I know the 49er fan host that we have here will be excited to know that that's Trey Lance's brother. He caught a pair of touchdowns for the Bison last week. So I think this is going to be a great one to watch between both these teams.
Yeah, I appreciate you, John, reminding me of the 49ers trading all that to get Trey Lance. That was a great pick. But we're going to stick with FCS. Let's assume that the number 1 team in the FCS, the Bobcats, get it done and they get the win at home. Out of these, the teams that they could possibly face, who do you think they match up better with?
Well, I don't know. Can I call a tie? I don't really like either matchup for whoever comes out of this side of the bracket. I will note that last season, Montana State lost narrowly to both teams. They played South Dakota State in Brookings and lost 20-16. They had a touchdown pass that looked like a touchdown pass to me in the back of the end zone, and they went to review and decided it wasn't a touchdown pass. And the normally mild-mannered Brent Vegan got a 15-yard penalty after that one. And so that was at the start of the year, and then the end of the season with a 35-34 loss to NDSU in the quarters, a stunner, and they missed the PAT, and that was the difference in the game. And I think both those games serve as fuel, so Montana State will be ready for both of them. But man, I really don't like. I don't think either one is a greater matchup than the other.
I was gonna hop in there and say the game against North Dakota State last year, wasn't that overtime and a blocked PAT at the end in the playoffs, and so that one was a very tight one and a pretty big shocker, because that was a seeded Montana State team losing to an unseeded North Dakota State who had a rough regular season and found their stride in the playoffs. But yeah, I'm going to have to kind of be similar to Fritz on this one. I don't think that there is really a preference in a matchup that the Cats would have in this. Both teams are great. I'd say you could give North Dakota State a little bit of an edge in the passing game, but you could give South Dakota State a little bit of an edge in the rushing game. So, yeah, both defenses have forced 20 turnovers this year, more than 20 turnovers this year. So it's a tough game no matter who they get.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it doesn't matter who they play. They're both going to be tough. I mean, watching South Dakota State, they got some huge offensive linemen, and they also got the pedigree. They're going for a three-peat. North Dakota State has been synonymous with FCS playoffs, the last decade and a half, but it's been a few years since they have been on the final stage. So that maybe that a little bit of edge to South Dakota State if they get back their familiar place in Frisco, staying in John's timeshares down there and stuff. We'll see. It's a big assumption that Montana State's going to win this week. So you got to wait and see. It could be an all Dakota final too. So, but I would say that it doesn't. Neither team favor is a better matchup for Montana State. They would just have to kind of do what they do and then see how that turns out.
Yeah, we shall see. South Dakota State and North Dakota State is the first game on the slate for Saturday. So Montana State will know who they're playing if they get the job done against South Dakota. They're at home, so hopefully the Bobcats pull it off. But moving on to my favorite portion of the show is when we make our picks. And it is worth noting that Mark has not been here for, I think, 3 or 4 episodes. And I just now have passed him on the leaderboard for my picks for the year. But as far as playoffs go, I'm in first place for the playoffs. I am 9-1 in the playoffs. So I'm making them count when they matter. Hopefully you didn't follow me throughout the season. Hopefully you're following me now during the playoffs. But on top of the leaderboard, as always, is Fritz. So Fritz, what do you got for the 2 games this weekend?
Well, I'm going to go with the Bobcats. I just realized, or it was pointed out to me today by the Grizz beat writer down here in Missoula, that this is the Bobcats' 4th trip to semis in 5 years, and it's something the Grizz have never done. They've gone 3 times in 3 years, but never 4 out of 5. And the Bobcats have as Mark noted, the pedigree, and I picked them to hold off South Dakota. And then the Dakota Marker 2 game, I'm going to pick South Dakota State to beat the Bison.
All right. John, you're next on the leaderboard. Same record as Fritz in the playoffs at 8-2. What do you got for this weekend?
I'm going for a 2021 title rematch. I've got Montana State winning over South Dakota, and I'm going to take North Dakota State in the Dakota Marker version 2.
All right. Ian is not here this week, but he did give me his picks. He also has the same picks as John. He's got North Dakota State winning, and he's got Montana State winning, so he's going with both of the home teams. Mark, what do you got for this weekend?
All righty, I'm going to take Montana State in a close one over South Dakota. And then I'm going to take South Dakota State and its pedigree to go into Fargo and beat North Dakota State.
All right, that leaves me. I also have Montana State winning. I think the home field advantage and then just being the best team in the FCS all year, I think it's going to hold true this weekend. This one I'm kind of tossed up about, and I'm being honest, I'm not too familiar with either of these teams. So I'm just going to pick South Dakota State just because of their pedigree, like everyone's mentioned. And because Fritz picked them, and he's been good on that all year. So I'm going to trust him on this one. But that is going to wrap up this episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I want to thank Fritz, John, and Mark for joining me this week. Join us again next week, where we'll break down the final 2 teams and also preview the national championship in Frisco. So it should be a good one. Thank you to everybody tuning in. We'll see you all next week on another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. Until then, take care.